you are staring at a $1.2 million listing on your screen. In 2026, it sits in a high-risk flood zone that insurance companies are quietly abandoning. You feel that familiar, low-frequency hum of anxiety. The fear that if you do not buy now, you will be locked out of the sun forever. You have been told that real estate is the safe bet, the one asset that never fails, the physical anchor in a digital world. But here is the part no one tells you. The price has almost nothing to do with the house. You are looking at a ghost. You are paying a tax you never signed up for. The legacy tax of speculation. The crushing 30-year mortgage you carry today is the descendant of a century-old heist. It is a psychological blueprint designed to turn your basic need for shelter into a high-stakes casino game. The modern housing bubble is not a glitch in the system. It is the system's finest feature, perfected exactly 100 years ago, in a place that should not have existed. Now, let us open the case file on the Florida Mirage and reveal the shadow behind the success. The year is 1920. The Great War is a fading nightmare, and America has discovered a highly addictive new drug: prosperity. For the first time, the middle class has a little extra weight in their pockets. Heavy gold coins and crisp greenbacks earned from a roaring industrial engine. But money is restless. It hates sitting still. It wants to grow, to breed, to escape the gray, soot-stained winters of the North. Enter the state of Florida. To the average New Yorker or Chicagoan in 1920, Florida was not a state. It was a myth. A dark, impenetrable wilderness of mangroves, cottonmouth snakes, and mosquitoes the size of houseflies. It was a graveyard for explorers. But the architects of the boom, men like Carl Fisher and George Merrick, did not see a swamp. They saw a blank canvas. They did not just sell land. They sold a manufactured paradise. They took the rugged, humid reality of the Everglades and draped it in the velvet of Mediterranean luxury. They built grand Spanish arches out of cheap lath and plaster, painted them the color of a sunset, and told the world that the fountain of youth had finally been subdivided into 50-foot lots. The scale of the deception was aggressively physical. In 1921, Carl Fisher's team began dredging the bottom of Biscayne Bay. They took the gray, rotting muck from the ocean floor and piled it onto the mangrove roots to create Miami Beach. They literally manufactured the earth beneath their feet. This was not a city built on bedrock. It was a city built on the discarded sludge of the Atlantic, held together by the sheer willpower of a marketing campaign. By 1924, the fever had broken out of the boardroom and spilled into the streets. In the archives, we find the Miami Daily News edition from the summer of 1925. It was not a newspaper. It was a weapon of mass persuasion. It ran to 504 pages, the largest single issue in the history of journalism, filled almost entirely with real estate advertisements. The numbers began to completely detach from reality. A plot of land in Miami that sold for $800 in 1910 was being flipped for $150,000 by 1925. To put that in perspective, $150,000 was enough to buy a fleet of 300 Model T Fords, or pay the annual salary of 100 school teachers. People were not buying land to build homes. They were buying the flip. The crime scene was set. The mark was the American public. The weapon was the dream of the tropics. And the getaway car was a new financial instrument that promised immense wealth, without an ounce of work. The trap was open, and the entire nation was walking right into the mouth of the swamp. The engine of this fraud was not made of steel or steam. It was made of paper. Specifically, a legally binding slip of paper called a binder. To understand how an entire nation lost its collective mind, you have to dissect the anatomy of the trap. In the mid-1920s, Florida was not a functioning real estate market. It was a high-velocity game of hot potato, played with ink and desperation. The mechanism was elegant in its predatory simplicity. First, the entry. You did not need to buy a house. You did not even need the full cash for a lot. You just needed a binder. A non-refundable deposit, usually 10% of the purchase price, which gave you a 30-day window to close the deal. Second, the leverage spiral. Because you only put down 10%, you could control 10 times more land than you could actually afford. If a lot cost $10,000, the price of a small mansion in Ohio, you only needed $1,000 to own it for a month. You possessed total asymmetric risk. Third, the exit liquidity. You never intended to pay the remaining $9,000. You spent those 30 days aggressively hunting for the next buyer. The greater fool. Someone willing to buy that binder from you for $2,000. In 48 hours, you had doubled your money without ever touching a shovel or laying a single brick. It was the absolute birth of modern-day trading, dressed in a crisp white linen suit, sweating under a palm tree. But here is the forensic kill shot that made it lethal. Watch a single piece of paper move through the circulatory system of debt. At 8 in the morning, a mechanic buys a binder for a swamp lot for $500. By noon, he sells that exact piece of paper to a school teacher for $800. At 4 in the afternoon, she flips it to a Chicago banker for $1,500. By midnight, a piece of land that no one has ever seen, a lot that currently belongs to an alligator, has generated thousands of dollars of phantom wealth. These binders were often resold 5, 6, even 10 times before a single deed changed hands. By the time the final bag holder showed up with real cash, the original seller had vanished from the paper trail. This was not investing. It was a localized hyperinflation event. The architects of this chaos were the binder boys. Picture thousands of young men, many barely out of their teens, descending on Miami and Coral Gables like a swarm of locusts. They did not have offices. They had street corners. They stood on the running boards of automobiles, shouting inflated prices into the humid air. They were the financial influencers of 1925, selling a shortcut to the American dream to anyone with a few $100s in their pocket. To keep this liquidity illusion alive, the promoters escalated to psychological warfare. Take Addison Misner, the man who invented Boca Raton. He was the chaotic visionary of 1925. He did not just sell empty lots. He weaponized status. Misner knew exactly what he was doing. He was not building homes. He was manufacturing time. He imported ancient stone from Europe. He used acid to burn and crack brand new wood, making it look antique. He even bought a live monkey to walk around his fake developments, creating an eccentric aura of untouchable genius that short-circuited the critical thinking of northern bankers. Americans did not want something new. They wanted the illusion that someone else had already verified the dream. He was selling old-world prestige, using mark-to-myth accounting. In 1925, Misner's company took in $2 million in a single day, roughly $35 million in today's money. For what? For castles in Spain that were often nothing more than hastily drawn blueprints over a mangrove thicket. The numbers were completely staggering. At the height of the boom, there were over 2,000 real estate offices in Miami alone. For a city with a permanent population of barely 70,000, that meant there was one desperate realtor for every 35 people. Everyone was a salesman. Your waiter, your barber, your doctor. Everyone had a hot tip on a lot in a place called Sun-Kissed Acres that was currently 3 feet underwater. This was the silent crime of regulatory arbitrage. The state of Florida had no blue sky laws to protect investors. There was no federal agency to monitor the wild claims. The smoking gun was not a hidden ledger. It was the fact that the ledger simply did not exist. The money you made on Monday was just the money your neighbor borrowed on Tuesday to buy the lot you sold on Wednesday. Absolute Ponzi dynamics. It was a closed loop of euphoria. But just as the illusion peaked, the physical world prepared an audit. It started with the railroad embargo of 1925. The sheer volume of building materials heading to Florida was so violently massive that the railroad systems physically broke down. They had to completely halt shipments. The demand was so rabid, it shattered the supply chain. While the Binder boys were busy counting their paper millions, in the dark waters of the Atlantic, a low-pressure system was forming. And it did not care about Spanish arches or 10% deposits. The mirage was about to meet the monster. Nature is the ultimate forensic auditor. It does not care about your marketing budget, and it absolutely does not recognize the value of a binder. On September 18, 1926, the brutal audit began. The Great Miami Hurricane did not just bring 150-mile-per-hour winds. It brought the terrifying truth. In a single night, the Spanish colonial stage sets were violently stripped of their plaster, revealing the cheap pine and chicken wire beneath. The Mediterranean dreams were pulverized into gray salt sludge. The forensic fact is chilling. The storm caused an estimated $100 million in property damage in 1926 dollars. Nearly $1.8 billion today. But the physical destruction was nothing compared to the financial vaporization. When the sun finally rose on the wreckage, the greater fool was nowhere to be found. The paper chain of binders snapped instantly. If you held a deposit on a lot that was now literally under 6 feet of Atlantic seawater, you did not double your money. You lost your entire life savings. The banks, which had fueled the speculative contagion, by accepting these wildly inflated values as collateral, began to buckle under the weight. By the time the Bank of Bay Biscayne collapsed in 1930, the Florida mirage had become a grim national cautionary tale. But did we actually learn? Look at your own life in 2026. You are constantly told that renting is throwing money away, while being blindly ushered into massive, inescapable debt contracts for properties whose prices are driven not by utility, but by the exact same speculative fever that gripped Miami a century ago. We have simply traded binder boys for algorithm bots. We have traded underwater lots for digital land in the metaverse and synthetic real estate tiers. The names change. The technology heavily evolves. But the heist remains exactly the same. The privatization of profit and the socialization of the swamp. The truth that Wall Street desperately hopes you never realize is this. The 30-year fixed mortgage you are carrying today is not a symbol of the American dream. It is just the most successful, legally sanctioned binder scheme ever created. You do not own your home. You own a highly leveraged option on the bank's asset, hoping the next generation will be a greater fool, willing to pay more for it. The Florida land boom taught the financial elite a dark, enduring lesson. You can sell a barren desert as a lush oasis as long as you control the lighting. They realized that the American public would rather go completely bankrupt chasing a manufactured dream, stay solvent in a boring reality. Every time you see a risk-free investment or a guaranteed return on a home you can barely afford, you are standing on Addison Misner's acid-aged roof tiles. You are participating in a century-old seance, trying to summon wealth from thin air. The ledger of 1926 was finally balanced by the Great Depression. A decade of dust and hunger. That was the crushing interest paid on a few short years of Florida's artificial sunshine. Today, we sit atop a global mountain of paper binders, waiting for the next hurricane. Be it a severe credit crunch, a climate disaster, or a systemic financial audit. Waiting for it to blow the cheap plaster off our own stage-set economy. So, ask yourself this uncomfortable question as you look at your bank balance tonight. If housing prices are driven strictly by speculation rather than actual utility, should real estate even be considered an investment anymore? Or is it just the most socially accepted bubble in American history? Think very carefully. Because in the cold, unforgiving ledger of history, every single debt must eventually be paid.